Hello and welcome to another session on the overlapping generations model. In this particular session, we look at this overlapping generations model, the two-period model with stochastic survival. And the material is taken from my book, Public Economics. Now, I assume that you are familiar with the overlapping generations model and exogenous technological change that we considered in the last session, in the last video, and which is the topic of chapter 3.4 in my book. Now we extend this model by introducing stochastic survival, so we do not know whether we live 60, 80 or 100 years. And this provides a rationale for the government, for the social security, to provide a pay-as-you-go pension. So what a pay-as-you-go pension basically does is to distribute from those who work to those to retire. And into the next period, the workers will retire and they will again receive a pension from the workers. Now with stochastic survival, this pay-as-you-go system ensures you against the risk of a long life, of longevity. Because imagine you assume, well, I live until 80 and I accumulate saving, let's say $300,000-$400,000. And then I notice at age 80, oh, I'm healthy and I will live another 10 or 20 years and I have exhausted my savings. And in this case, well, the pay-as-you-go pension system ensures you against this risk of a long life. And we will consider what will be the optimal pension system, the optimal amount of pension. Well, we find it's around 15 to 20%, so much lower than in the United States, and show you what it is sensitive to. You can contact me, write me an email, and I will send you the slides and the code that I use to compute it. Basically, we just solve a nonlinear equation system, fairly straightforward. And I hope you enjoy the next 20 to 30 minutes where I go into the details of the overlapping generations model with two periods and stochastic survival. So let's get into our slides here. Well, as I mentioned, individuals are subject to a longevity risk, and some live a long life and are happy, and some die young and leave some accidental bequest because they haven't planned on dying early. So now we want to introduce a pay-as-you-go pension system and stochastic survival in the standard overlapping generations model with growth. How shall we do this? Well, very simple. We have two periods. The first period that we interpret as working period, and a second period, H2, where we retire. And we assume that we only survive with a certain probability 5 from H1 to H2. Now, this implies some problems in our modeling. So far we had deterministic survival. So how shall we handle the assets, the accidental bequest of those who die? Well, we could introduce an explicit bequest motive, but that's very difficult because, as you can imagine, this introduces heterogeneity. So for example, if I die early, I leave bequest to my children, so they do not start their life with zero assets, but with inherited wealth. And therefore we have different kind of agents in the model, those who have inherited at the beginning of their life and those who have not. And if we continue this kind of process over time, we might have agents who have parents who have inherited wealth and parents who have not inherited wealth. So our number of agents grows exponentially, and in the long run, these different types cannot be handled by a computational routine that tries to solve this model with the help of a nonlinear equation system, but we have to resort to this value function method that is really tricky. So we have an endogenous distribution of wealth in our model, and this is tricky to handle. We will therefore do not consider this kind of bequest motive in our model. We do this in a different book, Heer and Mausner Dynamic General Equilibrium modeling, but here at this point we keep it simple. So there are different ways to keep it simple. One is to introduce annuity markets so that you bring your savings to a bank, and if you survive, you get a return. If not, the bank keeps your asset and distributes it to the other savers. Well, these kind of perfect annuities markets are hard to find. In some countries, well, this ideal is met. For example, annuities markets are more present in the United Kingdom than, for example, in my country, Germany. So often they do not exist, and they are not perfect annuity markets, so there are a lot of transaction costs involved and so on and so on. So we neglect this kind of possibility here. And the second possibility that's feasible here, that's the government confiscates all your accidental bequests and redistributes it to all households lump sum. That's what we do. Now let's take a look at our model in section 6.35 with exogenous growth and see how it changes. Well, our production does not change, so we have a production that's capitalist with labor augmenting technological progress, which is measured by the technology factor 80, and it grows at an exogenous rate gamma, which we calibrate to be approximately 2% per year. So this is nothing new. We look at the utility function, and in the case of deterministic survival, it looked like the first equation on the slide, that we have logarithm, that utility increases with the logarithm of consumption in both periods, but the second period, when we are old, we discount with the factor beta, and we get disutility from working, which is measured by the additive negative term on the right-hand side. And mu1 is simply the fresh labor supply elasticity, which measures the effect of an increase in the wage by 1% on my labor supply, keeping my marginal utility constant. Now, let's argue what will happen if we only survive as probability phi. Well, in this case, our second period utility, the logarithm of C2 in period t plus 1, is still discounted by the factor beta, but we multiply it by the probability of getting to the next age, so we multiply it by phi. So expected utility is simply the same expression, except that we multiply the utility terms in the second period of our life by the survival probability phi, and this is our expected lifetime utility at age 1. Okay, now let me show you on the board what's the timing in our model here. So this is important to understand how we derive accidental bequest and so on. So we live two periods, H1 and H2. And H1 we are workers, let's say we are workers, and H2 we are retirees. We live in a period T and T plus 1. And next period, another generation is born that lives two periods, and so that the cohorts, the old and the young, overlap. That's the overlapping generations model. Now, when we are young, we work, we get wage WT LT, and times our labor productivity AT. We work all period and we receive this wage at the end of the period T, at the end of the period 1. And then we consume and save C1T and ST. We provide the savings to the capital market, and in the capital market we receive the return RT times ST, RT plus 1 plus ST, so the real rate of return on our savings, which we get paid at the end of the of the period t plus 1, and then we consume ct2 plus 1. Now, stochastic survival sets in here. So we die at the beginning of period t plus 1. So we have already invested our savings in the capital market. Then we die. And then at the end of the period t plus 1, our government collects the accidental bequest. So and also collects the interest rate. Huh? So somebody must benefit from these interest rates and distributes them in both periods to our household at the amount of transfer t and transfer t plus 1. So that's the timing in our model. Okay, so to recapture, we have savings which are difference between income and consumption, and our income is our net income after we have paid social security contributions tau on our wage income WT, AT, LT. The WT is our real wage, AT is the technology factor for our labor augmenting technological progress, LT is our labor supply. Transfers TRT, which are paid to all households by the government, and we consume C1T of it. In the next period, we can consume all our savings plus interest, 1 plus RT times ST. We get a pay-as-you-go pension, pension T plus 1, and we also get transfers T plus 1. And we can combine these two equations to get the intertemporal budget constraint 65C. Now, the Lagrangian, we have to set up the Lagrangian to solve for the first order condition. And the first order conditions are given by equations 66, 67, 68. So according to 66, the Lagrangian multiplier lambda is equal to the marginal utility of consumption in the first period. According to equation 67, the Lagrangian multiplier divided by 1 plus the interest rate in period t is equal to the expected marginal utility in period 2. And according to equation 68, the marginal disutility from labor, the left-hand side of equation 68, is equal to the marginal utility gain from working an extra hour, and this is provided by the net wage, 1 minus tau times WT times AT, times the marginal utility of income, which is our Lagrange multiplier lambda. And we can combine these equations to get to the familiar Euler equation, 69a, which provides the condition how the household should build up savings so that his utility from consume an extra unit today is equal to utility from saving this unit, investing it in the capital market, and consume it in the next period. And we have already interpreted 6090b, the first order condition with respect to labor. To consider a stationary equilibrium, we have to divide variables by the technology factor AT. That's necessary because we want to solve for a steady state. And of course, consumption grows over time. And if we want to compute something like the rest point, we need to make it stationary so that the variable is constant in the long run. And this is achieved by dividing it by the technology factor AT in period t. And of course, consumption at old age in period t plus 1 must be divided by AT plus 1. So this provides the stationary first order conditions 70a and b. Now we can solve these first order conditions, use these first order conditions 70a or 69a, substitute in our intertemporal budget constraint 65c to solve for consumption in optimal consumption as a function of our income in both periods. So it's simply a multiple of our present income in both periods, the net wage income and the transfers in this period, and the discounted income of the second period, which is constituted, which is given by the pension income and the transfers in old age, and we have to discount it with the help of the real interest rate R. Now we can use this expression substituted in our expression for savings to derive savings as a function of our income over time. Okay, and as I have argued, in the capital market equilibrium, all our savings at the end of period T are equal to the savings of the beginning of period T, our capital stock in the next period T plus 1, which is used by production to produce our output good YT. And we have NT workers, big NT workers. Our population is of size NT and grows with lowercase n. And if we stationarize our capital market equilibrium, the total savings are equal to the aggregate capital stock. Well, then we get to the equation that stationary savings are equal to next period capital stock KT plus 1 times 1 plus the growth rate gamma times 1 plus the population growth rate n. And when we substitute our expression for savings into this capital market equilibrium, we derive the equation, the bottom equation on the slide. All right, stationarize it, and we have another equilibrium condition. Now we consider the government. The government runs a balanced social security budget. So the total contributions, so the young workers, which are of size NT, they each provide contributions tau times WT, AT, LT. And the pensions, well, the number of retirees are phi times NT minus 1. So the NT minus people were born in period T minus 1, and 1 minus phi dies and phi survives, so that the total number of retirees is phi times NT minus 1. Well, they receive pension T. And so that when we divide this equation here, this social security budget by AT and NT minus 1, we get to the stationary equation 71. Okay, now we have to introduce the final equilibrium condition here. The government runs a balanced fiscal budget so that all the accidental bequests that it confiscates are transferred to the households. The bequests are equal to 1 plus RT times ST minus 1 times the number of people that do not survive, 1 minus phi. And it's distributed to all living agents. So we have NT workers and phi times NT minus 1 old people, retirees, each get the same lump sum transfer, TRT. And if we divide this by NT minus 1 ST, NT minus 1 and AT, we get again a stationary equation given by 72. Okay, firms are described in the standard way as we know it from the previous section 3.4 on technology growth. So firms maximize profits, which are given by production minus wage cost minus interest cost minus depreciation, and we simply get that the wage rate is equal to the marginal product of capital and the real interest rate is equal to the marginal product of capital minus depreciation. Now we can combine all these equations. So we have 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 equations and 8 unknowns, and we can solve this numerically, and we simply have to allocate parameter values to these to the variables that show up, to the parameters that show up in the model. Okay, how do we do this? Well, we assume a period length of 30 years. So that's a little bit artificial. Usually the period length, let's say, of working age is 40 years, and for perhaps retirees live another 20, 30 years. So we simplify a lot by looking at an overlapping generations where the period length of workers is the same as the period length of the retirees. Usually it's more realistic to look at a 3-period model where households work 2 periods and retire for 1 period, so that the ratio the retirement is about 1/3 of your life. Well, this is a simplification, and we do it, of course, to make our analysis easy to understand, to access for you. Well, and we consider production elasticity of capital, which is the parameter alpha equal to 36%. Put differently, our wage income share, our wage share is 64%, which is approximately the value in the United States. The survival probability is taken from an article by Stefan Rohrbacher and me in the Journal of Health Economics, phi equal to 0.8 for the United States. I also deposited a video on YouTube where I describe this article. In this article, we show we shed some light on the fact why poor people live less, have a lower phi than rich people, and how progressive income taxation might help here. So if you like this, you just look up in my YouTube channel, or look it up in my YouTube channel, or I will send you the link if you send me an email. We assume that over 30 years, capital depreciates completely, delta equal to 100%. We assume an annual growth rate of 2%, implying a gamma of 0.811. We recalibrate our utility parameters mu0 and beta, so that two conditions hold simultaneously. First, the labor supply is 30% in our steady state, so meaning that we work 30% of our available time of 100% of 1. And we assume a real interest rate of 3% annually, which is approximately the value over the last 50, 60 years, implying an 30-period interest rate of 142%. Now the solution will be mu0 equal to 424 and a beta, an annual value of 0.14. So it's higher than 1. You may wonder why is this the case. In the Ramsey model, we cannot, with infinite horizon, we cannot choose a beta larger than 1. In the OLG model, we can choose larger values of 1. And there's empirical research by Heer that shows that actually our beta is higher than 1 once we account for stochastic survival. Okay. Now, let me comment on our assumption that R is larger than our choice of the real interest rate R and our growth rate G. So we have assumed R equal to 3% annually and G equal to 2%. This, as I've argued in my last video, constitutes a dynamically efficient economy, meaning that if we reduce our savings, not all our consumption will not increase in the new steady state. So we have a dynamically efficient economy. Let's look at some recent economic evidence by Helene and Mariels van Langenhove in the Journal of International Monetary Finance, who look at the difference between R and G, whether it's positive or negative, and they find, well, that for most of the time period they consider, the last 30, 35 years, indeed, the real interest rate R is larger than the per capita growth rate G and population growth rate N. So this clearly holds in the core Euro country, the solid line with the squared, and in the Anglo-American countries, the dotted line. Now, this relation started to turn negative by the year 2014, 2015, with the exception of the COVID-19 recession here. So that the real interest rate became lower than the growth rate, indicating a dynamically inefficient economy in OECD countries. Now, the authors, the three authors also project the difference R minus gamma, R minus G, over the next 20 years, and they find, well, it will stay below 0 for most European countries, indicating a dynamically inefficient economy here in Europe. And on the contrary, in the United States, you will find higher real interest rate than the growth rate, so that you have dynamically efficient economy. Notice that this also implies something for the debt carrying capacity of the governments. No? If you look at the government, let's say we have debt to GDP level, and we wonder how this evolves. So the United States now is hitting 100% and beyond. Italy 140%, France 120%, and this is in the year 2024, and it's growing, projected to grow each year because of high fiscal deficit. Well, for the dynamics of debt to GDP ratios, the relation between R and G is critical, no? Because debt we have to pay interest, real interest R, so our debt grows at least at rate R, even if we keep a fiscal balance, and GDP growth at the rate G. So if R is very small relative to G, that's good for fiscal balances and for the debt to GDP ratio, and vice versa for the United States, where R is projected to be above G. Well, the numerator grows faster than the denominator. So very important measure, very important statistics, R and G in an economy. Okay, now let's go to the results. An abolition of the pay-as-you-go system when we go from a contribution rate of 30% to 0. Savings increased by incredible 133%. So because when we have pensions paid from a pay-as-you-go system, we save less for old age, and if we abolish them, well, then our savings increase magnificently. Well, notice also that in our benchmark case, welfare decreases by 4% of total consumption in this case. Why? Because when we start to increase our savings by a lot here, well, our real interest rate becomes lower and lower, below even the growth rate. And as a consequence, we have a dynamically inefficient economy where welfare increases for the current and future generations if we reduce savings in the capital stock. Okay, so, and we also can consider the optimal steady state pension, and we find that the optimal steady state pension is 19% in this simple model, meaning that the contribution rate should be 19%. In our simple model, the contribution rate is also equal to the replacement rate, so the ratio of pensions to wages, average wages. And let's consider the United States. Where do we stand? Well, in the United States, we have a contribution rate which is much less, half of it, of 90%, but we have a replacement rate around 37%. So in this case, tau should be 37%, much higher. So to calibrate the model, therefore, is a little bit difficult. We took the intermediate value somewhere between the contribution rate and the replacement rate. We calibrated tau to 30%, and the optimal value is given to 90%. So our very, very rudimentary results here indicate that we should reduce the pay-as-you-go system, the pension system, a bit. And the steady state welfare gain from this would be 1.8% of total consumption. That's not little. So this is a lot of welfare gains. So if you look, for example, at the welfare effects of abolishing business cycles, it's hard to get more than 0.5% or percent of total consumption as a welfare effect from cyclical fluctuations. So to get a steady state welfare gain of 1.8% is quite a lot. Now let me mention that all our results are extremely sensitive with respect to our calibration of our parameters. So, for example, if we had chosen a higher or lower real interest rate, rather 2 or 4% annually, our welfare results are very sensitive to this. So for a higher interest rate, 4 or 5%, it's optimal to abolish pensions completely. And for a lower pension rate, a lower real interest rate, let's say 2 or 1%, a much higher pension contribution rate is optimal. So please be very careful when you apply these results. And if you would like to play around with the code, study this sensitivity, or would like to get the slides here, just send me an email, burkhard.heer@uni-ada, and I will be happy to respond to your email. So thank you for your attention. I hope you like this result. So we find, yes, there's some rationale to have a pay-as-you-go pension system to ensure against the risk of long life, and you have to adjust your OLG model. And it's not so easy to introduce a mechanism. What happens to the accidental bequest if someone dies early? We have to somewhat take care of his assets, and we assumed it's redistributed. Of course, our results are also sensitive with respect to this assumption. Well, to introduce, for example, a bequest motive and dynastic structure, so that you either inherit something from a parent or not, makes a big difference. Thank you very much.